Howdy, how's it going? Welcome back, or howdy if you're new. Well, we have a little bit of a different video today. I want to go over a few questions that I've been getting asked about the new Jsaux backplate with their heatsink, and we're going to go over the top questions that I've been getting asked. We're going to cover some NVMe questions that I've been getting asked previously about the Chonky mod and using the HandheldDiy Backplate. We're going to talk about if you can use the Jsaux heatsink with the HandheldDiy Backplate. We're going to cover the 2280 questions. We're going to cover a lot. So if you have any questions about cooling, NVMEs, or anything like that, drop it below if I missed it, and I'll be happy to address it either in the Discord, a short, the next video, or whatever. You know, I really will reply to you guys. I try to reply to every single comment no matter what. So definitely I appreciate those for sure. Okay, well let's dive in and we'll just get to the meat and the potatoes. No more rambling. So I think the first question that we got asked is about the flap. This should always be removed in my experience and professional opinion here. So the reason you want to remove this flap is actually it really is just a dust crud barrier. I have had this thing removed forever now. I have not had any quarrels or problems with it, so I've always just had it removed. It did lower temperatures a few degrees, so that is something that you should test out yourself and try. I definitely would remove this, even if you're not using any of these mods. Now, if you want to use the Chonky mod, still remove it, but I have seen some people who are just really just anal about it, I guess.
Try to relax your anus.
You can cut it. You can just cut it and put it back there. But this would benefit some people, but for me, it's a no-go. I remove it. All right, so the Chonky mod, let's continue with that theme. The Chonky mod with the Jsaux plate and the stock plate works fine. Remember, with the stock plate, the area that we had to notate where it fits in that hole.
Yeah, boy.
If you're using the HandheldDiy and you want to use the heatsink, you'll need to come in here and you'll need to clip this flush with some clippers. That will allow you to have full clearance and not be interfering with anything. Now, if you're going to use the 2280 mod, you'll just need to come over here and clip the other side. No big deal, super easy to do. This is what it looks like with it. So just come in here and snip and snip, and that'll give you more than enough room to have clearance. If you are wanting to do the 2280 mod, this is what I use and this is what I recommend. So removing the stock drive is pretty easy. Remember, it doesn't come up very easy, so you have to slide it towards you first and then kind of lift up. It's a little tricky. If you try to lift it like most drives, it could actually damage the drive or the connector. So this is the particular adapter that I use. There's many of them like this. Just make sure it is a PCIe 4.0, and I'll drop a link for this below so you can get the same one that I have. So all you'll need to do is slide this puppy in like so, and then you'll screw it down with the stock screw. For drive recommendations, I have several different drives that I recommend, but they are constantly evolving in price. So when I recommend a drive or any type of computer hardware, it really is based upon kind of a price to performance ratio. So if I recommend one drive today and then tomorrow you check the video and the price is $500, well, it no longer is my recommended drive because the price is absolutely nuts. So always check to see, you know, in the Discord, if we have a certain drive that's on sale, we'll try to share that in the deals section. So always remember that is there, or you could just ask me directly, ping me, and I'll reply, this is what drive I found today. That's a 2 terabyte or 4 terabyte or whatever. So the other thing is, if you are looking for a drive by yourself, make sure that it is single-sided, preferably. And when I say single-sided, this is an M.2 drive with no memory on the back. This is an M.2 drive with memory on the back. And the reason why that can be important is because when you're putting it down like so, you're actually going to be heating these memory chips on the back up a little bit more, because there's really no effective way to cool them off properly. I've tried a few different options. Most NVMe heat sinks that have a double-sided layer on them just don't fit that well, and they'll be up too much, and it can put a lot of stress on this connector, or your backplate just might not close in general. So it's kind of tricky. It can be done, but it's just, in general, I don't recommend double-sided drives. I'm using a double-sided drive, it's fine, but what I do use is another protective layer on the back side of this, so it kind of bounces some of that heat back upwards, and it blocks some of this heat, puts it back downwards, so it's not transferring any heat. All right, so the 2280 question out of the way, you plug it in just like that. There's going to be a little flap that goes in here, and it clamps down on that drive. But one of the other things that you can do, if you are having any clearance issues with NVMe drives hitting, or you can't clamp them down good, you could take a rubber washer like this and put underneath here and then screw it down, and it raises that clearance up just a little bit, so it might help some of you who are running into clearance issues. Okay, let's talk about this. I know this was a big question. So I quickly want to preface this video and ask you to not skip around and just watch the entire thing, because I will go over a couple of reasons why 2280 drives don't technically fit. Yes, you technically can fit some, but not all. But there's a lot of caveats to even the ones that do fit. You're not going to be 100% happy. Be cautious and careful if anyone does show you a 2280 fitting with this particular heatsink in question, because it's not as clear cut as you may think. I kind of overlooked this option just simply because I tested it on, and then I immediately noticed that it wasn't touching the heat pipe. So I was like, well, what's the point of having the thermal pad here and this cooling off the APU? Like, what's the point if it doesn't actually make contact with it? So I thought about it, and I was like, well, let me at least show them what it does. And this may be viable to some, it may be useful to you. So if this is useful to you, definitely let me know. But you can use this on a 2280 drive with this particular adapter. What's happening is this thermal pad is only going to make contact with the drive, because now your heat pipe is actually lower than the drive. What's going to happen is this thermal pad has a higher clearance. So you would need to do one of two things. You would need to raise the height of this thermal pad right here if you want to make contact with the APU, or you could just simply put it on there like that. So, okay, so we're going to try it with a fresh 2280 drive. We are going to be using one of those ADATA S70s that we just got back from RMA. Putting the drive in a 2280 position, I strongly advise putting at least some kind of barrier, plastic, something non-conductive, not a thermal pad preferably, behind there so it doesn't short out on any of the capacitors and the memory doesn't actually touch anything that's going to get hot. So putting the NVMe drive down, it should stay. If you have an issue with the type of layout you're using, you can put this little standoff here, and most of these come with, or some of them have the little leg going all the way across. Your mileage may vary. One of the other things is this power cable. It's kind of going to get in the way a little bit, so you may need to kind of like move it around, but the NVMe will put a little pressure on that power cable. Should be okay in the long run, but only time will tell. I haven't had a problem with mine, but that's just something to notate. Now, putting this heatsink back on, like I said, ideally we would want to raise up the center, because what's happening is our memory chip here and our other chips on the drive are actually higher now than our heat pipe. So they're actually going to be touching this first. So now that this is essentially higher, we're not going to make any contact with the center portion of this heat pipe. And we're going to FAFO and we're going to find out. Putting this down in here feels a little weird. It does not always seat in here perfectly, so I sometimes have to play around with it. It's just really not the most ideal scenario with most drives. So it's sitting on there on top of the NVMe drive now. It's definitely there, but you can see the thermal pad flop. it's not even making contact on the corners. We still have about a 1.5 millimeter gap. So really we're going to need to put in like a 2.5 millimeter pad just on this top part for the APU heat pipe in order for it to actually touch. How well is it actually going to work? I've even tried different pad configurations and upgrading, but since it's actually standing off that NVMe so high compared to the other side, the other heat pipe rather, it's not making contact. And if we use the 2230 in there, then we get it low enough to be able to touch that heat pipe. It's not ideal. All of my arguments still stand. I still don't like it. It still just does not work for me. But I just wanted to add this context to the video because I'm going to constantly be working on this and trying to improve this situation because I want to come up with a perfect solution. And this, in my opinion, is not like a textbook perfect solution. There's a lot of caveats. So earlier we used this for demonstration purposes, but I'm going to show you the differences in the thickness of the drives and why it actually matters, and why using something with heat sinks that are pre-applied are not going to work, and then using drives with memory on the back is not going to work. So this is a single-sided drive with a thickness of about 2 millimeters thick. 2 millimeter thick is perfect. But then if you look at this Sabrent drive, we got 3 millimeters. So we have an extra millimeter of clearance that we're not going to be able to deal with, unfortunately. And then over here, we got 3.4 millimeters. So the thickness of all these drives varies so much drive to drive that I can't tell you what drive is going to work and what drive is not going to work, other than what seems to be the general consensus of what will work is finding a single-sided drive without that memory on the back, and you'll have a much higher chance of it actually working. So since I don't have a single-sided drive that has the transfer speeds of a good drive, like this is a generic M.2 256 gig SanDisk. It's an X400 drive. It's got very slow transfer speeds. This drive right here is MSATA. It's not going to get hot enough to really make a difference. It's not a fast drive. These are very fast drives. So actually with that, I'm not even going to venture into testing this right now. Like I said, I'm going to wait. I'm going to save it because I really want to find that perfect solution. And with this 2 millimeter plus category, like these are getting thicker and thicker. Like that is 3.3 millimeters right here in this spot right here. 3.3. That's too thick. I was noticing such a large gap, as you saw a minute ago, where the actual thermal pad right there is just flopping. Also, I have another theory that if I plug this drive in, I don't even know if it's actually going to close anymore.
Nope.
Let's try to close it, because that's actually another concern when you're adding that much thickness.
Nope.
We can barely get it closed here. We actually have it pushing a lot outwards. And so we're not even really going to safely be able to get that thing to close, because we're going to be putting so much pressure on that drive to where it's not worth it, in my opinion, especially if you have a double-sided drive or anything for that matter where it's thicker. So measure your drive thickness. If it's under if it's 2 millimeters or less, it's going to fit. With the caveat of you're not still getting contact with that heat pipe. With the 2 millimeter drive, we were able to get contact on the corners of the heat pipe. But yeah, this has just gone on too long. Look, you can see I'm trying, guys. I don't like to, rag on a product. I don't want anything to be known as like a bad product unless it's just truly a bad product. This isn't really a bad product. It just wasn't I guess, tested as much in all different scenarios, because with the ROG Ally, if you're using the stock configuration, it might work okay for you. But if you're using any type of 2280, it's not as clear and cut of a situation. So be aware of this. If you're going to buy the heatsink, know it's going to take some FAFO. Know you're going to have to do your due diligence with checking drive clearances and things like that. With that out of the way, that's answered. Now, the next question that everyone had was, can you use it with a handheld DIY backplate? And the answer is yes, but you'll also need to remember you'll have to cut here, here, and you'll need to cut here, here, and here. So there will be a lot of cutting that you'll have to do. You'll have to cut here, 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 here. And I'll show you on the stock plate right here. So you'll have to cut this off. You'll have to snip on each one of these corners right here and snip inside and outside and just work your way down. Because if you try to cut the whole thing, it might not cut. It might actually make it worse. Dremel tools are kind of risky because of the heat that they produce, and it could warp the backplate or melt it altogether. So using some really sharp clippers is definitely the way. And then you'll clip here, and then you'll clip here, and you'll just kind of go down and make sure all that is out of the way so it actually can fit down in there. Because without it, you see it will not close. There's no way it will actually hit. But on this one that we've clearanced, we actually can make it fit in there. And you can see right here, when I talk about the screw doesn't do anything, this is just a hole that allows it to line up. It's not actually going to screw it down. And if you put a screw through here, then how else would you get that in there? Some commenter really suggested that I didn't have it screwed down, but there's that. So let's put it on and we'll show you what it does with the 2280 and the handheld DIY backplate. Let's see if we can line it up. A little tricky to line up. All right, so we have definite contact because I can feel it bulging a little bit. But if you are going to use the handheld DIY model and you do want to use an NVMe like a 2280, you do have two options. You can slap that down there like that. It will take some of that thermal pad and it will cool, but it's not super ideal because of how much heat is produced. So let me show you. When the thermal pad is on there underneath, that's all that's actually going to be cooling it. So your controller up here is likely not getting cooled, and the last end and that whole side. So it's basically only cooling like half the memory chips and maybe a little bit of the controller on some drives, depending on where it's at. It's not ideal. So what I did is I cut mine down the line in the middle with a razor blade. I cut mine like that so I can align it like so, allowing me to use a heatsink on an NVMe drive like that. So when I put it back together, I still have my heatsink, I have my thermal pad, and the clearance is spot on. The thermal pad actually still has some clearance and some squish, so it does make good contact with this backplate here. This does touch a little bit here, so not much, but more or less you're just really going to be cooling it passively through the heatsink itself. You could put a very, very thin 0.5mm pad here, maybe get a little extra thermal transfer, but it's not needed. I think this was the best solution that I have come up with, and overall my temperatures speak for themselves. When I'm gaming, my temps on the APU are between 60 and 70 degrees with this solution. My NVMe ends up running between 30 and 40 degrees on the controller side, so I just don't think it's a really big deal to go overboard with cooling. We'll revisit this. Like I said, I'm going to do some more testing. I do have some other options for you for cooling. You could buy one of these kits right here, and they actually have pre-applied thermal tape, and they do a good job at transferring thermal energy. You can just start stacking these things on here and make sure you don't lose any clearance. But you could just start stacking these things on here like that, and you can kind of make a puzzle out of it. Take a bunch of these and bada bing, bada boom. And you can even take these and put some of them on your VRAM chips down here. You'll have to kind of move that cable around. It may not fit. You may have to use like a smaller one right here. You may have to use some creativity, but you could try to cool these off. Every little bit might help. So let's put this backplate on. So if you have the Jsaux backplate and you feel like you missed out on that heatsink, well, here's a perfect best of both worlds scenario. So if you've already got the Jsaux backplate and you've got a 2280 that's cooled and you're happy with the way it's cooled and you don't want to change anything, well, you could pick up one of these kits like this and make your own heatsink. And if you are using a fan mod like I've done before with the Noctua and the RGB fan, you could even use these and it will help even more because you're actually going to have airflow going over them. So in that case, you might want to flip these around like so, and have them all facing this direction so the airflow can hit them in the best way possible. You can experiment with them. That's the cool thing about mods, is we're all just experimenting. We are trying to find the best possible solutions for our devices so they cool optimally and we don't have to run the fans as high, and we can just achieve lower temperatures overall. All right, guys, that's it. End of the video. We're gonna edit it. We're gonna get it out, and I think next on the dock today for me to do is to do this. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab my soldering iron and my heat gun, and we're gonna get to it. I gotta do some cutting, I gotta do some soldering, and I guess we're gonna do it. So if you like this video, definitely leave a like, comment, subscribe, whatever you want to do. I appreciate it. And if you made it to the end, you are an OG, and you definitely know. Huge shout out and thanks to our first channel member. I might be pronouncing the name wrong, but I'll put it up here on screen. It's Diogo Lentz, and if I pronounced your name wrong, definitely drop in the comments below, and I really appreciate it. You are an OG, and I definitely appreciate that so much that you just have no idea. I will be putting out some content for the members only section starting this week, so look forward to that, and I will see you guys on the next one. So I hope you have a good afternoon, good evening, or good night.